Helped a coworker with her project, she tried to take full credit. HR saw the emails. They tell you to be a team player. Help her, my manager had said. We all lift each other up. It sounded noble in the meeting room with the faux wood table and the Gradient Company poster on the wall. It sounded like the sort of thing you repeated on onboarding slides and in quarterly all-hands when someone wins a sales target. It sounded even better when Jeremy from People bought catered lunches and bright balloons for collaboration wins. I should have known. I should have paused. I should have kept my hand on my laptop and counted to 10. But the person who asked for help that Monday morning was Lee Morales, 28, sharp, easy to smile at the coffee machine, and she was scrambling. Her voice over Slack had been a mess of capital letters and exclamation points, and her PowerPoint draft read like someone trying to translate a business idea from a different language. She owned the client relationship, or at least her name was on the account sheet, and she was about to present to the product committee in 48 hours. If the deck bombed, their account might go to another team. If their account went, so could the pipeline she'd been building. I'd been in her shoes once months earlier, when my own presentation got looped into an executive call and a senior asked the wrong question. I'd lost sleep for a week. So I did what the slide said. I helped. I stayed late that night and reworked the slide flow. I threaded the narrative so the data supported the ask. I added 2 case studies from our internal knowledge base and rewrote the speaking notes. Scaffolding, I called it. I stayed the next morning to rehearse with her, timing cues and trigger words, and we polished the deck until the transitions felt like choreography. We ran through body language, handling objections, and the 3-sentence summary that would close the talk. She hugged me at 9:30 the morning of the presentation and said, "I couldn't have done it without you." I nodded and felt the familiar warm glow that comes from being appreciated. It was small, domestic gratitude, the kind you trade in office culture to keep the team engine oiled. At the product committee, Lee's voice was steady. The committee liked the data, they warmed to the user story, they loved the pilot ROI. The director leaned in and asked for a pilot budget, and by the time the meeting ended, the ask was approved. Lee beamed. People clapped. It felt like a win. A week later, I was at my desk, inbox humming like a neon beehive. I scrolled through congratulatory messages and saw one from Jeremy. Major props to Lee for the product committee win, stellar leadership. Party popper, let's celebrate her ownership. My chest dropped. Ownership. I checked the slide deck. My revisions were there. The flow I'd suggested remained. The talking points I'd typed into the speaker notes were verbatim in the PDF Lee had uploaded to the drive. I opened my Slack history. There it was, my "here's a clean version" message and Lee's perfect "thank you" reply. That was the entire record of our collaboration. Me doing the quiet, boring, essential work, her taking the stage and the applause. I should have been quietly pleased that the project had gone through. Instead, something stiffened inside me, like a door catching on its hinge. 2 weeks later, the end-of-quarter town hall rolled around. They reserved the first 20 minutes for team highlights, a string of one-line shout-outs and photos. Jeremy stood before the room with the microphone and said, "Let's give a huge round of applause to Lee for leading the X-account pilot. Lee has shown exceptional leadership and took full ownership." The video feed cut to Lee's smiling face. People clapped and cheered. I felt air leave the room. I wasn't naive about office politics. I had paid my dues as the quiet person who optimizes spreadsheets and keeps data tidy. I'd been the person who made sure projects didn't fall through the cracks. That kind of work doesn't come with balloons. It doesn't come with LinkedIn highlights. It comes with the comfort of knowing things will run smoothly and the satisfaction of a job well done. Still, the sting wasn't really about the recognition. It was the way the story got told, the way the narrative left out 3 late nights and the entire exchange of emails where I had suggested how to reframe the ask. It was the sense that my labor could be waved away like a background prop in someone else's victory photo. I let it go for a week because that's what I do. Then an offhand comment in the hallway tripped me. "I've heard Lee is being considered for senior product manager," said Martin from Analytics, tossing his badge onto his chest. "About time she got a promotion." I said. My mouth tasted like coins. A promotion for Lee would be fair if she owned the work. But promotions change pipelines and reporting, and they shift the axis of future credit. If she'd presented cleanly and led the pilot, fine. But if she had presented my work as entirely hers, with no mention of collaboration, Then a promotion would cement an inaccurate narrative that could follow me for years. So I did something stupid and brave. I opened my sent items and started to build a folder called X Account, Drafts and Edits. I dragged our exchanges into it. I pulled version history from the drive. I exported comments and meeting notes. I printed the Slack thread and the deck history. The process felt petty, almost vindictive, and yet it also felt like taking inventory of truth. It turned out truth had an odd way of accumulating evidence. The turning came on a Tuesday. Lee had submitted expense reports for the pilot kickoff meal, and HR asked her to come in to get signatures from the finance team. While she was out of her inbox, I noticed a new email thread in our project channel. It wasn't addressed to me, but it was forwarded to my manager by mistake. The subject line, Final Slides for Committee Lee Share, and it contained the version history I had helped create. Someone had mistakenly not removed track changes. And in the comments beside a slide that I had rewritten was a line in Lee's voice. Can we use Mark's phrasing here? He nailed the value storytelling section. That one sentence was a breadcrumb, small yes but crucial, an admission that my phrasing had been used. I copied the thread, added it to my folder, and then froze. I told myself I was being dramatic. I ran a mental list of possibilities. Perhaps Lee would acknowledge me in the next update. Perhaps she'd be mortified if I simply told her I'd done the heavy lifting and we could co-own the success. Maybe I was reading too much into office human nature. I decided on the humane approach. I popped into the conference room where she and a few people were debriefing and casual as possible said, "Hey, congrats." That deck opened the door. She smiled, all white teeth and professional warmth. "Actually," she said, sipping her coffee, "I've already started putting together a write-up for marketing. Want to co-author it? I can put you as a collaborator on the post." "Sounds good," I said. The relief hit like a cool shower. She took my offer and ran with it. The co-authored blog post hit LinkedIn 2 days later with metadata listing her as the author, and curiously, not listing collaborators. The post used language lifted from the speaker notes I had written. The comments filled with congratulatory emojis and great leadership remarks. My name was nowhere to be found. That night, I opened my laptop with an odd flush of cold anger. The phrase "credit where credit is due" looped in my head like an old ad. I'd been overlooked before. At my last job, I'd rewritten a white paper credited to another team lead, but this felt like a pattern, and I'd had enough of patterns. I asked for counsel. My mentor, Lisa, had been with the company for 8 years. She was blunt and kind in equal measure. She took one look at the email folder I'd compiled and said, "You have receipts, don't burn bridges yet, but don't let this go. HR needs to see facts, not feelings. Present the timeline, the versions, and the Slack history. Keep your tone factual, let HR do the rest." I swallowed hard. There are 2 things HR teams hate: drama without documentation and managers who push without evidence. Lisa had learned how to work within the machine, and I trusted her instincts more than my rising blood pressure. I wrote a short, level-headed email to People Ops. I attached the folder I'd assembled and provided a clear timeline: drafts, edits, my meetings with Lee, and the version histories. I phrased things as, "I'm seeking clarification on attribution for the X account deliverables and would like HR's guidance." No accusation, no finger-pointing. Just the facts. HR replied within 48 hours. "Thanks for sharing, Mark. We'll review and schedule a confidential conversation." Many things happen in that gap between sending an email and hearing back from HR. Time stretches and compresses. You replay scenes. You draft versions of what you'll say. You imagine the worst and then the best. In my case, I also watched Lee walk around the office like she owned the sun. She seemed buoyed by the accolades. The promotion rumor swelled into gossip. The ball was rolling, and my anxiety turned into a kind of quiet resolve. HR's initial conversation with Lee was polite and professional. Lee presented herself as the confident owner of the deliverable. She said I led that project end to end, with the assurance of someone reading from a well-thumbed script. HR's notes from that meeting made my heart sink, until I saw HR's second call, them asking to see Slack logs, version histories, and draft files. They were doing due diligence. Almost immediately, the rhythm of the office changed. HR's review is a low drumbeat that people sense, the careful searching of facts, the delicate unfolding of threads. People who like tidy narratives began to hedge. Small side conversations fizzled when an HR rep was nearby. Managers who had been casual with their praise became intentionally neutral. Then came the thing I hadn't fully expected. The emails leaked. Not a leak in a scandalous way. HR doesn't leak when they're doing an investigation. But in the course of their review, an assistant in legal forwarded a redlined copy back to HR with an engineer's note. This track change history shows Mark's language present. That showed up in my folder because HR included it in their response to me with the words, "We found evidence in the version history showing language contributed by another team member. Are you able to provide context?" I replied with calm with the exact timeline with copies of the Slack perfect thank you, and my clean version messages. I offered to meet. HR scheduled a three-way with Lei, her manager, and me. Walking into that meeting felt like stepping into a courtroom. The room had the polished neutrality of institutional spaces. No personal artifacts, no colors, only a round table and a small dish of mint candies. HR's Tina sat on one side, her legal pad poised like a judge. Lei's manager Lauren sat to my left. Lei sat across from me, composed. Tina started with, "We're here to understand the chain of ownership for the X account deliverables. Mark, can you describe your involvement?" I did. I spoke in a deliberate tone, focusing on dates, messages, and files. I recited specifics. What slide I wrote on July 12, the speaker notes I drafted on July 13, the Slack message on July 14 where Lei asked for phrasing help. Lei's face remained an unreadable calm. When it came to Lei's turn, there was a moment of silence where I felt the aircon switch off and the room narrow. She recited a different story, that she had shepherded the deck, that she had made choices and guided edits, that the final narrative reflected her framing. She used words like leadership and ownership, and I felt something in my throat break, not because the words were untrue, they weren't entirely, but because her telling left out the scaffolding that made the narrative possible. Tina took notes and asked a precise question. "Lei, can you point to any message where Mark is credited or to a version note that indicates co-authorship?" She shifted and gave a noncommittal reply. Lauren, Lei's manager, colored the room with discomfort. Loyalty and the desire to protect a direct report are subtle magnets. Tina asked again, "We also found track changes and a red line that indicate contributions from Mark. Lei, are you able to explain?" There was a pause long enough to make my palms sweat. Lei's eyes flicked to mine and then lowered. I referenced Mark's suggestions in the revisions, but I didn't realize I should have explicitly credited him, she said. It was a small human thing, an admission of sloppiness rather than malice. I felt a twist of something like relief and disgust in equal measure. Tina looked at Lei slowly. "Attribution matters," she said. "It informs hiring and promotions. It informs compensation. It informs the integrity of our work. We are going to document this and speak with the product committee and leadership about appropriate next steps." I heard those words as both vindication and risk. HR could have closed the case with a recommendation for Lei to update her post and give me a public mention. Or they could find a pattern of behavior. They could push for retraction. They could recommend disciplinary action. At that point, the office ran on small, calibrated consequences. Formal coaching, notation in personnel files, and for more severe breaches, rescinded offers or lost promotions. 2 days later, HR called me back. They were measured and precise. "We reviewed the evidence. We found that Lei presented material substantially authored by you without appropriate attribution. Her manager has accepted responsibility for oversight failures. We have issued a written counseling and required a formal correction to the published materials that reassigned authorship and acknowledged contributions. We will also be pausing the promotion review for Lei pending completion of a leadership and ownership training program." I felt my shoulders deflate like a balloon. The result was not dramatic, no public firing, no vindictive spectacle, but it carried consequences. Lei's manager had to enter a performance review note about supervision. Lei herself had to commit to learning about authorship norms. The promotion rumor lost its steam. In the weeks that followed, something else happened that mattered more than policy. People started to talk to me differently. Small acknowledgments appeared in meetings. "Thanks, Mark, for the framing," and people CC'd me in project threads. My manager Alex pulled me aside and said, "I'm sorry that happened. You did the right thing to document. If you want, we'll make sure your contributions are recognized going forward." He offered me a seat at a new client kickoff as lead for the narrative flow. That seat mattered in a way balloons don't. It put me in a position to shape the story from the beginning. Lei came into my desk area one morning after the dust had settled. She was quieter. "Mark, I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time she looked genuinely small. "I got swept up in the moment and I didn't think. I see how it affected you." I appreciate that, I said. Her apology was thin for the late nights and the looming promotion, but there's a human trade-off in these things. People make mistakes, sometimes big ones. I believed her apology because it came with action. She reworked the LinkedIn post, adding contributors, and she invited me to co-present at the pilot debrief. She kept to her commitment to training. The company documented the incident and converted it into a teachable moment. Authorship guidelines became part of our onboarding materials. The triumph wasn't theatrical. It was the steady, practical restoration of fairness. But I didn't stop there. The experience shifted something in me. I realized that being the underrecognized person wasn't only about collecting receipts and waiting for justice. It was about building systems that made recognition harder to steal. I started doing 3 things. First, I made visible habits. Whenever I drafted a deck or a white paper, I left comments in the doc and invited collaborators in the file's metadata. Before sending a deliverable to leadership, I wrote a brief contributor note in the body of the email. Worked with Lee Morales PM and the analytics team Martin Aisha to craft the narrative. I made collaboration auditable. Second, I coached teammates quietly on how to credit. It's amazing how many people, bright, eager people, didn't understand the mechanics of attribution. Some thought a presentation was a performance only the lead deserved. Others thought co-authors could remain invisible. We held a 15-minute lunch and learned about credit culture and what co-authoring looked like in practice. Third, I changed my own posture. I stopped being the ghost in the machine whose work was always tidy and thus invisible. I learned to say early and often, I drafted X, happy to co-present. I practiced microclaims, small and honest. I put this metric together before the slide deck was circulated. It felt awkward at first, like announcing a minor triumph at a family dinner, but it worked. When you whisper your contribution, no one will belatedly claim it as their entire self. 6 months later, my name began to appear in the places it deserved to be. I co-led a pilot kickoff and was explicitly introduced as the person who would own the narrative. When our team won an internal innovation award, the project write-up listed contributors. I got a modest bump in compensation tied to performance reviews, where my manager mentioned the quality and strategic impact of my work. Lee. She matured. She completed leadership training and privately told me that the incident had been humbling. I never realized the way I'd absorbed credit, she said in an honest conversation that felt like a door opening. Part of me thought that being the face of the project meant I owned it. We began to collaborate again, this time with explicit attributions and a rhythm of co-authorship. The dynamic was different now. She led client relationships and I shaped narratives. We complemented rather than competed. In the end, the real triumph was quieter than I'd anticipated. It wasn't a dramatic call-out or a viral post. It was the slow accrual of fairness, practices, small codes of conduct, a manager taking care to recognize contributions, coworkers learning to ask who wrote that. Instead of a scoreboard, I built muscle memory, document, attribute, and speak up. There were losses too. Office life is an ecosystem, someone's misstep ripples. Lee lost some momentum in her promotion pipeline. Her confidence took a hit. Yet she also gained something valuable, clarity. And I gained something I'd wanted for a long time but had never thought to ask for, the respect to be visible for the work I do. People sometimes ask me whether I regret involving HR. They imagine the specter of escalation or the bitterness of having someone else penalized. I tell them the truth, I regret that I let it get that far. I regret not being assertive earlier. But I don't regret documenting the facts. Systems work on evidence, and if you expect an organization to be fair, you have to make fairness possible. There's another reason I don't regret it. A few months after the dust settled, the company published its internal best practices playbook and included a short case study about authorship and attribution, a de-identified version of our incident. It's small, buried within a PDF, but it's read by new hires who get the message. Credit matters here. You can call it a tiny institutional change, but tiny things become culture. On a rainy afternoon, I found myself standing in the kitchenette, stirring a slightly burned pot of communal soup. Lee walked in carrying a travel mug. We stood in silence for a moment, watching condensation bead on the window. You did good work, she said suddenly, not a grand apology but a small, honest phrase. Thanks, I said. The sound of it felt different now. Not triumphalist, not vengeful. Solid. We laughed about the burnt soup. We talked about the next pilot. We sketched ideas on a napkin. She pointed to a sentence and said, "You should write this one." I reached for the pen, and when I wrote, Lee watched. She didn't steal the ink. She didn't hide the line. When the napkin folded and went with the proposal, both our names were on the cover note. That night, I filed the napkin in a new folder I'd labeled simply, "Wins Shared." It felt like the quietest, most important victory of all.